who do you ask for help? Okay? You cannot complete major goals in your life without the help of others. Your ability to create and fulfill those goals really determines it's determined by your ability to ask for help. So, yesterday we talked about this law of the lid, right? So the understanding that your leadership ability determines your effectiveness, right? Well, your lid also determines how much help you receive. So I'll give you a great example. When you have a lack of communication in a relationship, guess what? The other person probably isn't going to help you, right? I remember one time I had a boss, and he had very high standards. Okay, now there's nothing wrong with this guy except he lacked communication. So typically it was around deadlines. He was not a planner, an organizer. I was. I honestly, at the time, I didn't understand why he didn't understand this. He was the boss. He should know that, right? Now, on the other side of a lot of learning, I've realized, whoa, that's a natural knack for me, not so much for him. I wish I would have known what I know now. I could have helped him a little bit more back then. However, the one thing that he did never communicated was, I need these numbers. I need this paperwork. I need it by this deadline, right? And so typically what would happen is that the deadline would be looming, sometimes hours, right? I remember one time there was a pretty significant bill that was due, and he neglected to communicate that to me. And so at the last hour, literally the last hour, as in the office that the payment was due, was going to close in 1 hour, I had to make a 45-minute trip very fast to go and drop off this check. And it was an emergency thing, right? So everything that I was doing was put on hold because now we have an emergency, right? Now, of course, things like that can happen, right? Sometimes there's emergencies, there's things that pop up, right? But for me, in this particular role, because of his lack of communication, it became an almost everyday occurrence. And you know what? I didn't stay at that job too long. And so his ability to communicate, or lack of the ability to communicate, made it so that I couldn't really help him. And long story short, I was out of there, right? And so sometimes what happens is that people who are really great leaders in your organization, they leave because there's maybe a lid on your leadership ability. And so who do you ask for help with this? Because it's really important to understand that. Maybe you have a new program or a new product, or you're launching a new thing. How have you grown yourself up until now to be able to do that? Okay, so for example, maybe you have a small team. I have a mentor. They have a very small team that runs their whole organization, and they're very fond of saying, "Hey, we're a small but mighty team," right? So maybe you're getting ready to launch this new program, and right now I'm really thinking about our educators. Many of them are going back to school, if not within the next few days, definitely within the next few weeks. And of course, it's a very difficult time right now at all levels of education. How do we make decisions that are going to give people what they need and keep everybody safe? And how do we have plans with options and more contingencies on top of that? It's a very difficult time to be an educator right now. And so I think about, in terms of, if you're a business owner, you'll understand if you're launching a new product or program, there's a lot that goes into that, right? If you're an educator going into the school year, first of all, there's a lot that goes into that anyway, but doing it COVID style is totally different, right? And so you got to ask yourself, how have I grown as a person to be able to even be doing this, right? Some of you need to ask for help. You just need to suck it up and ask for help. So there's a We talked yesterday about designing your self-discipline, putting yourself on an improvement plan for growth, right? We don't want to be frantic. We want this to be, something that we're focused on. We don't want it to be an emergency. We want something that every day we can become better in, right? So way back when COVID started, I began to really speak and say, and maybe some of you remember this on the podcast, now is the time to really set aside some time to get better in whatever area you want to get better in. Because let's face it, there are many educators right now going into that classroom, whether it be in person or virtual, that still are not prepared for that. But they could have started their preparation way back when. Now, there's a lot that goes into that, so I'm not here to judge, to blame, shame, or guilt anybody. It is what it is, right? But don't wait for a crisis or an emergency to figure out, oh, I need to do better. If you know you need to do better, let's say a crisis or emergency shows up, much like that old boss of mine, and, at one point I had to come in and say, I'm not doing this anymore. Okay, you can ask me for help all you want, but I'm not doing this anymore because your help needs to come 2 weeks prior. So ask me for help 2 weeks prior. You're golden. I will help you. If it's 2 hours prior, I'm not going to help you anymore. You got to figure something else out. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. Really, who do you ask for help? Are they continuing to help you or are they not? Because that's a big clue. So there's a couple things that you can really think about. Number one is, what people skills might you have? Okay, so as you're reflecting and getting to know yourself, if you were to give yourself a rating of 1 to 10 in people skills, what would your rating be? 1 being, I hate people, I never want to deal with them again, and 10 being, oh my gosh, they're my everything, right? Now, I would say on average. So if you are listening to this podcast first thing in the morning and you're like, oh, people, great. That might skew your number. If you are listening to this at the end of the day, maybe it was a rough day and you're like, oh, people, right? That might skew your number too. On an average, what would you say is your number for people skills? And what's the evidence for that? Okay, what in your life can you say, yes, I'm a solid number 6? Why? And then what's your plan to grow to that next level? Okay, so do that for people skills. Another one is this idea of planning and being organized and strategic thinking. Some of you are pros. I know you, and I'm like, oh my gosh, when I have to think through something, I reach out to you because you are amazing. Okay, some of you are way heavier on the people side of things. This one, not so much. That's just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what's your number? 1 to 10. What's the evidence for that? And how are you going to grow? Another thing that you need to think about and be aware of is this idea of having a big picture vision, right? Especially if you have a team. I've been talking to educators the last 2 months for sure. Let's think through, what does this big picture look like? And that's very difficult to do when you're thinking through things like, well, what is the governor going to say? What is the State Board of Education going to say? What are our funders going to say, right? And so some of the clients we've worked with, we've come and said, okay, let's just try to come up with different plans, right? So if you can go back to school, normal fashion, what might that look like? If you can go back to school with some, restrictions on it, what might that look like? If you do a combination of in-school and virtual, what might that look like? If it has to be all virtual, what might that look like, right? So coming up with options, but really keeping in mind the big picture, that it's still your job to come up with a plan, even when you don't know all of the intricate details to it, okay? That might be a skill of yours, and if it's not, that's something you need to ask help for, okay? Because it's still your responsibility as a leader and influencer. And then the last thing is just this idea of getting results, getting stuff done. Can you reach your metrics? Can you, I think about the salesperson. Do you make your sales target? Yes or no? The educator, do you get your paperwork in on time? Yes or no? Do you show up to work on time? Which I think, most people, they don't realize how many people don't do that. Okay. So the things that you're responsible for, how do you get that stuff done? What's your number? 1 to 10, 1 being what's the result? And 10 being, oh yes, I definitely do that. What's your number? What's the evidence? And what's your plan to grow? Now, these 4 pieces are really a great way to think about, because for a normal person, right, somebody who really hasn't put in years and years and years of getting better at these things, for most normal people, these are 4 topics that typically are not relatable. So you're probably going to be higher in one and lower in another. Okay, which is just fine. You might find that 2 of them you're high in and 2 you're low, or 1 you're really high and 3 you're really low. Okay, maybe 3 you're high in and 1 you're really low. I don't know what that combination is going to be for you, but get to know yourself. And the ones that you're really low in, let's say you're a people person. You love people, you love being around people, but you get the people skills one, you get the big picture vision. I know where we're going. I know why we're going to do that. But maybe your planning and your organization and getting the results is not necessarily your forte. That's awesome. You know why? Because now you know who you need to ask for help. You need to find people that have those skill sets and ask them for help. And don't wait until the deadline is tomorrow to ask for help, okay? Because you don't want to get into that position where I was with my old boss and having it be an emergency, urgent situation, okay? Ask people for help ahead of time. They will be more than glad to help you, I'm sure. Okay? Now, one of the things I did as I was going through and developing this lesson for you today is I thought through some homework. So definitely follow the link in the description or the comments. Again, like many other things that we've done before, it's going to take you over to my site in Kajabi. It's going to ask for your name and email. You can decide to sign up for the email list if you want. You do not have to, although I would highly encourage it. But you do not have to do that in order to get this document, okay? In the document, you're going to have those 4 areas. It's going to ask you to think through, 1 to 10. So if you didn't write those down, go to the link. It will have it right in there for you, okay? And then the next piece of that is it's going to ask you to talk about some goals. Who's going to help you? How are you going to make that happen? And then I have a really, really cool tool that I'm so excited to share with you. So in John Maxwell's 21 Laws of Leadership book, he has, in one of his appendix, he has a leadership assessment. And it basically goes through more than just the 4 that I'm going to share with you today. It goes through 21 of his laws, and it asks you to do a self-assessment. Okay, so I just went through and I typed that out for you. So if you really truly want to know where you are in your leadership ability and know, okay, what's the next step in my plan? Take that test. You'll know a little bit more about yourself, and then you'll be able to make that plan, okay? Awesome. So follow the link, get your homework, do your reflection, and if you can do that with a group or a team that you have, all the better, okay? Awesome. With that, I release you into the wild. Go forth and prosper. Have an amazing day. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.